It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something bold.
Hello, I'm Karen Redmond, Chair of Waterloo Region, and on behalf of Waterloo Regional Council, I would like to welcome you to Waterloo Wellington's Children's Groundwater Festival. Groundwater is central to Waterloo Region. We depend on it. Groundwater provides over 80% of our clean drinkable water, and it also allows our farms, schools, and businesses to function. It also reminds us how connected and dependent our region is on the natural environment. Science and nature take our groundwater on an incredible cycle through our community. I hope everyone in attendance has a fun and successful festival. Please share the message of Groundwater Festival on social media and share how important groundwater is to you and to our region.
Hi everyone, it's Mayor Cam Guthrie from the city of Guelph, and welcome to the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. And I really appreciate that I'm able to bring greetings on behalf of the city to all of you that are joining. And you know what, as the mayor of Guelph, I just want you to know that the conversations around water are actually very important to me. In fact, Guelph is one of the largest cities in Canada that relies on groundwater. We don't have a lake or a river that we can access for water in that way. And so groundwater is important to take care of. There are sometimes some risks, and so we have to be super careful on how we deal with our water in Guelph. Now, the cool part is that the people of Guelph and the businesses of Guelph actually really know how to take care of our water. In fact, the people of Guelph use 30% less of the daily amount of water than any other Canadians because we know how to conserve it so well. I'll give you one quick example. We introduced a new way of cleaning all of our transit buses by actually capturing all of the rainwater to wash the buses, and that saves alone 1.9 million liters of water a year. And so that's just some of the neat stuff that we're doing here in Guelph. So have a good rest of the day, enjoy the festival, and remember to always conserve and take care of water no matter where you are. Take care, bye-bye.
Welcome to the virtual Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. My name is Kelly Linton. I'm the Mayor of Centre Wellington and the Warden of Wellington County. I love the Waterloo Wellington's Children's Groundwater Festival. For the past 25 years, this festival has brought experts together to talk about the importance of water to our lives and our communities. That is something that will never change. No matter how much life changes around us, no matter what new technologies are invented, water will always be one of our most essential resources, right up there with air. Local government leaders are tasked with protecting and safeguarding our water. I take this responsibility really seriously. I want to wish the festival and all the students who attend this great virtual event all the best. Enjoy all of the Groundwater Festival posts on social media, and please share them with your families and friends. Have a great time.
I volunteered for the festival the first year when I was in grade 10 as a high school student. One of my teachers brought me to the festival knowing that I was interested in the environmental field. During that first visit, I learned quite a lot about groundwater and the impact that it has, and I continued volunteering for the festival for another 8 or 9 years or so after that, and it really did lead me down the road I'm on today as a career in groundwater resources and groundwater remediation. As a water professional, the Groundwater Festival is very important to teach young children and even the adults that come and volunteer with them about our water resources, the groundwater that they drink on a daily basis, and the importance of conservation of this program. It allows us as the City of Guelph, as well as the other member municipalities, to feed our messages about preservation and conservation and resource management through a variety of different fun and exciting games that the kids actively enjoy and play in, as well as the volunteers have a great time.
So it's important to have events like the Groundwater Festival because in Southern Ontario we're very blessed with what appears to be an abundance of water. and it seems to be an unlimited resource. And I think at an early age, it's important to teach that water is not an unlimited resource, and it's a finite resource that we need to take care of and care for into the future.
Well, good morning to you all. Welcome to day 2 of our virtual Groundwater Festival. My name is Michael. I am coming to you from the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum, where we normally would have been assembling here, and in our historic village here. Unfortunately, we're not able to assemble, and we will again, I promise you. But for this year, we are coming online and we are streaming to you so that you can enjoy and learn about all sorts of things water related. Now, before we start, I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the people that were here before us, those Indigenous community members, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral peoples, and how in this area, where you're sitting likely today, those peoples had taken care of the land and the water for many years, thousands of years before today, before us. But those people are not gone. Those people, those communities of Indigenous people, they are still here. And they have knowledge and wisdom that they can share, and they are eager to share, that will help us learn and continue to take care of our natural resources and the natural environment. We are about to start. I am about to introduce you to a friend of mine who is going to help us put the day together. But before we do, I just want to show you a map. This map that you're looking at, it shows you a section of land called the Haldimand Tract. And the Haldimand Tract, it runs on 6 miles either side of the Grand River. This is a section of land, shown in white down the center there, of an area that was promised to the Indigenous people near about 250 years ago. And what you see on that map is a yellow section of what those Indigenous people at Six Nations actually got. And so I show you this map, and I let you know about this promise, because it's going to be up to us, and it's going to be up to you to think through what's fair and how to approach this promise that was not kept. And so I encourage you to think through these issues that are still ongoing today. Issues around water and land, and who has rights to it, and what promises were made. With no further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my friend Kevin and get this day started. Kevin?
Well, many thanks, Michael, and I hope your day is going well. And a warm welcome to you all. Good morning, and welcome to the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. We have a really good lineup for you today, and today's topic is all about watersheds. We're going to find out, what a watershed actually is, and we're going to also look at how water systems are actually connected. We're going to look at the Great Lakes, and we're also going to look at ways that you can help reduce the pollution problem with plastics in our oceans. So a really good day ahead of us, and I'd encourage all of you fine folks to make use of our chat room, especially if you have any questions that you want answered. We have a whole battery of subject specialists waiting in our chat rooms just to answer your questions. Or if you have an observation that you'd like to put forth, all you have to do, again, hop on into the chat room. Now, speaking of the chat room, social media being what it is sometimes, we do have some rules in place, but they're pretty straightforward. Essentially, what we're looking from you is good, common decency. So basically, be respectful. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means things like only use language that you would use around your teacher or your parents, for example. Or just be nice. Don't make nasty comments about other people's questions or observations. That's just not on. We want to have a good day ahead of us. And just in case things go off the rails, some of our fine folks in the chat room will just send you off to a timeout area. But well, we don't want any of that to happen. How about we make those folks' morning really boring and just be your good, kind, decent selves that I know you can be. Do we have a deal? That's great. Well, it's time to kick things off, and we're going to do that with our first trivia question of the day, and that is, what are the names of the 5 Great Lakes? I'll repeat that for you. What are the names of the 5 Great Lakes? Well, we'll share our answers with you very shortly, but first, we're going to learn a lot more about watersheds.
Hello, my name is Kayana, and this is my dad, Peter. Today we will be talking to you about watersheds and the water cycle. What are watersheds? Well, the name can be misleading.
Misleading because a watershed is not a shed to store water, but an area of land where precipitation is drained to one point.
Basically, a watershed is land that drains rainwater into rivers and streams, which then continue to drain into larger bodies of water until they reach a common point. Watersheds include towns, cities, forests, agricultural plains, and floodplains.
Watersheds can also be called drainage basins or catchments. They are important because the flow and quality of water are affected by the land they drain through.
Watersheds are also a key component to the water cycle. Condensation occurs to gaseous water particles in the air, which then precipitate and fall to earth as rain. Watersheds then drain this water into rivers and streams, which then drain into lakes, bays, seas, and even oceans. There, the water evaporates and the cycle starts again.
To provide a visual of how a watershed works, we have a demonstration that you would normally get to experiment with if we were not in a pandemic. And this is how it works.
The funnels each represent different parts of the watershed system. The top represents nature, the second represents a creek, this one is a river, this one is a lake, and this is the ocean, as most lakes' water eventually drains into it.
Let's pretend that we just had a lot of snow in the winter. I'm going to plug this top funnel, and if I release it, it's going to symbolize a spring melt of the snow, and as the water goes through the watershed. You can see it goes really quickly through the watershed.
Yeah, but in real life, there would be other factors that regulate the water's flow. One of these natural factors is a wetland. These usually border bodies of water. Wetlands act like sponges. Their vegetation soaks up excess water and slowly releases it. Let's put a couple wetlands in our watershed. Let's see how this works now. As you can see, it's more regulated and slow.
So the wetland is absorbing the water. In addition to regulating water flow, wetlands are incredibly important to wildlife biodiversity. They provide habitat for all types of species, including amphibians, birds, fish, and plants. And for these reasons, wetlands should be protected.
We also have human intervention to manage water flow. One way we do this is by using dams.
I think we first got the dam idea from beavers. Beavers are incredibly adept at using mud and sticks to create barriers to stop or restrict water flow.
Anyway, these stoppers are going to represent man-made dams. They let through some of the water, but not all of it, so they regulate the water's flow. Let's put this in our watershed and then see how it affects it.
So another rain event happening here. You can see that the wetlands and the dam in particular is managing the water going through.
Dams and wetlands work together to regulate the water's flow. Now, speaking of water management, we have a great example of this beside us now. This is the Woolwich Reservoir on the Grand River watershed. Reservoirs are created to store water, and most are created by dams, as this one was.
Now we are at the bottom or the lower side of the dam where you can see some water is being released, just like the stopper. Before the dam and resulting reservoir were here, there is a river called the Canagajig River. You can see that below the dam, this river continues in its more natural state.
The river will flow down the watershed, eventually draining into the Grand River, which drains into Lake Erie and finally the ocean. A real-life example of the important natural system called the watershed. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye!
Well, thanks so much, Peter and Kiana. That was wonderful. Now, I actually think I'm starting to understand what a watershed is. There's hope for us all. Well, our next activity is also going to help us to understand more about watersheds, and it uses a really neat special sandbox that will tell us how water actually makes its way through a watershed. So, let's have a look.
Hello everyone. I wanted to share this map with you, but before we do that, I wanted you to think about what a map is. So if you think about what a map is, it's a picture from up in the air looking down on the ground. On the map, to represent different things, they have to use colors. So for water, they use blue. Sometimes forests are green. Now, buildings are squares. Roads could be lines with different colors. But how do they represent hills on a map? Because that's really hard to do. So I'm going to zoom you in a little bit on this map, and you'll notice there are some lines on the map. So if you look very carefully, you're going to see some lines. Those lines each represent an elevation above sea level. If the lines, and they're called contour lines, if the lines are close together, then that represents a hill. These lines are far apart, so this is a flat area. So let's make a hill. Here we go. Watch what happens when I make a hill. Beep. You can see how the lines are now close together. Now you'll also notice some water has appeared. So what's happened is I've dug down close enough to the ground, underground, and I've hit water. So that happens in real life. So let's cover that up. We're going to make the watershed, the Grand River watershed, and that watershed is a main river and all of its tributaries. So in Ontario, southern Ontario, here are a bunch of watersheds. So there we go. So let's build the Grand River watershed. So the Grand River starts up near a place called Dundalk, and it's about as wide as your desk at school, and it travels downhill. So here's the Grand River. That's the main river in our area of the world. It goes through a bunch of towns. It goes through Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Paris, Brantford, Caledonia, Dunnville, and it makes its way to one of the Great Lakes. Makes its way to Lake Erie. So let's make Lake Erie. Here we go. And there we go. You can see the water flowing downhill here to Lake Erie. All right, that's awesome. Now, there are some tributaries that flow into the Grand River. So if you live in Guelph, we have the Speed River. So there it is, right there. If you live in Paris, we have the Nith River. It's a very windy river, and it joins up with the Grand in Paris. And there's a bunch of other rivers that join up. So we're going to, there's the Grand. Now, how does the water get in the Grand River? It gets in from these other rivers. It also gets in from the sky. And so, when it rains, that water, when it rains in our area of the world, that water ends up in the Grand River. So I can get some rain going. There we go. So you can see it going into the Speed River, and it's flowing into the Grand River, right there near Cambridge. And same with the Nith, so we can get some water. It eventually flows into the Grand River just near Paris. So you can see that. Now occasionally, especially in the springtime, when it rains and we get a lot of snow melting, we get extra water. So sometimes we actually get flooding. So here's the extra water. See what happens. Just notice where all the water goes. Some of it flows down the hills into the Great Lakes. Some of it flows across the land, and some of it gets stuck on the land. So you can see the low areas. That's where the water gets stuck, and so that's one way we get extra water. The other way the water gets in the river is there's water underground. If you dig down far enough, you can hit water. And so sometimes that water percolates up to the surface. It's called springs, and it goes into the river that way. So you can see that happening. Sometimes we, especially in the summertime, we sometimes don't get very much rain, and so we get droughts. And so we get very little water flowing, which isn't very good, especially if you're a creature that lives in the water. So one of the things the Conservation Authority does is we have some dams upstream of Lake Erie. On the Speed River, we have a dam. Here's my dam. I'm gonna make one. I'm gonna put it right about there. So there's Guelph, and here's Guelph Lake right behind it. So behind the dam, there's a reservoir. If you're from Guelph, you'll recognize that. There's a dam on the Grand River called Bellwood, and there's a dam on the Conestoga River called the Conestoga Dam. So they all do the same thing. In the spring, if we get extra water, those dams hold the water back, so you can see behind the dam here. And then that water is slowly released out into the river system over the summer, so that there's always water in the river. So you can see the Guelph Lake here, there's still water, and it's flowing into the Grand. This is really important, especially if you live way down here in Brantford, because Brantford gets all of their water out of the Grand River. Now let's see what happens when we get extra water again. One more time. Here we go. That's a drought. There we go. We'll see where the water goes. You can see it all flowing downhill. Some of it gets trapped on the land. Some of it soaks through the soil. And some of it runs into the river. So that is the Grand River Watershed. Thanks. We'll see you guys later.
Well, thanks, Dwayne. Now that's a high-tech sandbox, don't you think? That is really neat to see how the water systems are actually interconnected, isn't it? Well, before we move on to our next activity, let's answer our first trivia question. And as a reminder, that question was, what are the names of the 5 Great Lakes? Now, if you answered Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, and Lake Superior? You are correct. Well, we'll be learning more about the Great Lakes very shortly, but we're going to actually go into our second trivia question for you for the day, just to test your water knowledge. So the next one, it's a little trickier. What is the name of the watershed where you live? Remember, share your answers in our chat room, and then we'll share the answers with everybody very shortly. But first, let's take a trip along the Grand River.
Welcome. We hope you're enjoying the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. Please sit back, relax, and come with us on a trip along the Grand River. Hi, I'm Wally the Water Droplet, and I want you to join me on a trip that I and millions of my fellow water droplets take every year through the Grand River Watershed. As we move along in our trip, you can follow along on the map in the upper left corner of your screen. All streams, creeks, and rivers in the Grand River Watershed connect with the Grand River, and there are a lot of them. The Speed, the Aramosa, the Nith, the Conestoga rivers are all tributaries of the Grand, and we're going to visit them all today. But first, what is a tributary? A tributary means a small river or creek that flows in and joins a larger river, in this case, the Grand. So let's get started on our trip. Our trip gets started close to Dundalk in the northern part of the watershed, as number 3 on the map. From this point, our trip will take close to 310 kilometers, and it'll drop in elevation 351 meters, which is about the height of a 115-story building. So one of those skyscrapers in downtown Toronto. Our next stop is Luther Marsh, home to over 250 species of birds. This is an important wetland complex and provides habitat for many fish, frogs, turtles, other wildlife, and of course, the birds. Continuing down the Grand, we now reach our first human-made structure on the Grand River, the Shand Dam at the Bellwood Lake Reservoir. There are a number of reservoirs along the Grand River watershed, all created by dams that provide flood protection, wildlife habitat, and recreational opportunities. Bellwood Lake is just one of them. Downstream of Bellwood Lake is the town of Fergus in the township of Centre Wellington. Here the Grand flows on a rock bottom, and dolostone and limestone cliffs are starting to give us a hint about what lies just downstream. Now, talking about bedrock, we're now going to take a short detour underneath the ground. I'm going to show you how some of my fellow water droplets recharge the groundwater. So this is a map of the Grand River. We see Fergus and Elora, and we see the Grand River Valley and Bellwood Lake. We are now going to go underground. You can see the different colors that show the different layers of soil and bedrock that are underneath the Grand at this point in the watershed. So the darker the color, so the purple or the dark blue, the slower it takes the water droplets to travel underground. The green and yellow at the bottom represent where Fergus and Elora get their municipal water from. We now go above ground and get to travel through the Elora Gorge. This is where the bedrock we were just talking about forms big and dramatic cliffs. The Elora Gorge has been created over a very long time by the Grand River eroding the rock and soil. Moving downstream on the Grand River from the Elora Gorge is an area called Wilson's Flats, where the Grand River spreads out and the bedrock is buried again underneath the soil. This video is during the spring, when the Grand River sometimes floods and goes over the riverbanks. You can tell because all of those trees don't usually grow in the middle of the river. Moving along, next is the beautiful West Montrose covered bridge that was built in 1881 and is one of the oldest covered bridges in Canada. It's also known as the Kissing Bridge. Next, we're going to take our first trip up a tributary, the Conestoga River. So you can see that we're right now at number 10, and we're going to move all the way up on the map to number 11. Now, number 11 is near Arthur, Ontario. And then, as I mentioned before, this is the Conestoga River. So following the Conestoga River downstream, there's another reservoir and dam, this time Conestoga Lake. Conestoga Lake has many homes and cottages on it, and lots of swimming and boating. The lake also protects downstream towns from flooding. Following along on the Conestoga, we now enter the area north of the city of Waterloo, where there are a lot of farms raising all kinds of livestock, including cows, pigs, and growing lots of crops. It is also an area where many Mennonites live and still travel by horse and buggy. Next, in the city of Waterloo, now on Laurel Creek, another tributary of the Grand, we have Columbia Lake by the University of Waterloo. Next is Silver Lake, also on Laurel Creek, and this is right in downtown Waterloo, and you can see some of the apartment buildings and houses in the background. Waterloo is one of many cities in the Grand River Watershed. In total, the Grand River Watershed is home to close to 1 million people. So whether you follow either Laurel Creek or the Conestoga River, we end up back at the Grand River as it goes by the city of Kitchener. Following along downstream, the Grand then meets up with the Speed River in the city of Cambridge. And in this photo, you can see the Grand on the left and the Speed River on the right, and lots of buildings in Cambridge and parts of Kitchener. Now we're going to go and take a trip on the Speed River, which is another tributary of the Grand. So we're going to move from number 18 all the way up to 19 on the map. Our first stop on the Speed River is Guelph Lake. Guelph Lake is a large lake created by the dam you see in this video. This lake is used for camping, boating, swimming, and the Hillside Music Festival in the summer. Moving downstream on the Speed, we learn that the Speed also has tributaries, in this case the Aramosa River, which flows through Rockwood and joins the Speed in downtown Guelph. Back in Guelph, we follow the Speed River through the downtown part of Guelph, and you can notice here that the river is much straighter, with many more buildings along its banks. This is because humans have straightened the river over the years, instead of leaving it to flow naturally. Leaving Guelph, we end up back down the Speed River where it meets the Grand River in Cambridge. This photo shows part of Preston in the city of Cambridge and is stop 22 on the map. This is the Speed River here, and this is where it joins the Grand. We're now going to continue down the Grand for the rest of the trip. So following the Grand River south, we reach Paris, Ontario, a beautiful downtown area built right on the Grand River. This is also where the Nith River joins the Grand, and if you watch the map, you'll see us go from number 23 in Paris to 24 in New Hamburg on the Nith. And this is a photo of the Nith River in New Hamburg. Moving back down the Nith to the Grand River, and then going through Paris and downstream of Paris, we reach the city of Brantford. The city of Brantford is one of the municipalities that takes and treats its drinking water from the Grand River. Here's another photo from Brantford, and you can see the Grand River is starting to get much wider now as all of these tributaries have joined the river. We now journey down the Grand to one of the First Nation territories along the Grand River. The Grand River is home to both the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. As acknowledged in today's land acknowledgement, the Grand River Watershed is located in the Haldimand Tract, an area of 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from mouth to source that was set aside for the Six Nations in 1784. Continuing downstream, we see a railway bridge crossing the Grand River at Cayuga. The Grand River is very wide now, and it sure looks a lot different from that small stream that we saw in Dundalk. And you can see on the map that we're now at 28, and you can see that we're approaching Lake Erie. And now we're close to the end of our journey. Here, the river flows through Dunnville on its way to emptying into Lake Erie at Port Maitland. We now see a shot of the Port Maitland Lighthouse during a storm, right where the Grand River enters the lake. And on a calmer day, you see the Grand River and Lake Erie water mixing together. From here, our journey as water droplets continue through Lake Erie and eventually all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. But that is another story. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you had a good time.
Well, thanks for the tour, Wally. Yeah, the Grand River certainly lives up to its name, doesn't it? It is certainly grand. Well, it's time to answer our second trivia question of the day. And just as a reminder, that question was, what is the name of the watershed where you live? Well, if you live in our part of the world, which is Waterloo Region and the Wellington County, the correct answer is the Grand River Watershed. And we're going to continue to learn about the Grand River Watershed, and Sue is actually going to show us how to use a map to explore it. So, take it away, Sue.
So already this morning we've learned all about what a watershed is, and it's an area that collects all the rainfall and then takes it together and then it outlets to one place. So think of the watershed like a bathtub, where you've got the shower as the rainwater, and then it all slopes down in the bathtub and then collects down in that drain. So this includes all the farms and hills and valleys and cities and roads and ditches, all going to one place. So where we live, in the city of Guelph, or the region of Waterloo, or the county of Wellington, we are in the Grand River Watershed. So even though our local creeks and rivers could have different names, like the Conestoga River or Irvine Creek, all of these same smaller creeks and rivers, they end up going to the Grand River. And this whole watershed is 6,800 kilometers squared. That's about the size of Prince Edward Island, our smallest province in Canada. So we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to use a map to figure out how the rain falls in our watershed. This is a map that's available through the Grand River Conservation Authority website. And perhaps if you've got this printed off through your teacher already, you can grab a pen and a marker and you can draw on this map, or you can just follow along with me for the video. So it's probably weird to see a map that has this shape on it. It's super squiggly and doesn't have a lot of straight lines. And maybe you've seen a map of Canada or you've seen a map of your own town, but probably not one that looks like this. But like other maps you see, it's got a title on it, which tells you what the name of the map is. It's got a legend on it, which tells you about what the symbols on the map means. It's got a compass rose on it that tells you which direction is north. And it's got a scale on it to show you how far apart the various things on the map are from each other. So this map shows all the major rivers, and it shows the minor rivers as well, so the large and small rivers in the Grand River Watershed. If you take a look at it, you'll notice that it's got rivers shaped like a hand on it. There's 5 different major rivers on there. So there's the Grand River in the middle of the watershed. There's the Speed and Armasa rivers coming from the east through Guelph. There's the Conestoga River that comes from the west, and the Nith River as well that ends up meeting the Grand River in Paris. There are also lots of other rivers and creeks in our watershed too. So now we're going to take a look at the map. The watershed, or source of the river, is where the river starts. Where do you think on this map the river would start? If you said it was at the top of the map, or where the river is the smallest, you're right. So this is actually a fun fact, is that this top area in Ontario is called the headwaters, and there are a lot of other major rivers that start up here too. So the Credit River that flows to Lake Ontario, or the Nottawasaga River that flows to Georgian Bay, or the Saugeen River that flows to Lake Huron. Now, while water flows down from higher elevation to lower elevation, or from a higher spot to a lower spot, it doesn't always mean that water flows to the bottom or to the south of the map. That's just how it works out in this watershed. So rivers in northern Ontario flow to James Bay, and rivers in northern Canada flow to the Arctic Ocean. So can you figure out where your town or city is on this map? It's going to be different for all of us. So if you're home or school or in the country, let's pick a town that's maybe close to where you live. The largest cities and towns on the map, they're identified in pink, so that's showing where the developed area is. In our watershed, the biggest towns and cities are Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, Guelph. And then in the county of Wellington, we've got other smaller towns like Rockwood, Elora and Fergus, Arthur and Drayton. And in Waterloo region, we've got Elmira and St. Jacobs and St. Clemens and Heidelberg, St. Agatha and Baden. When you found your city or your nearest town, let's draw a little circle there with your marker. And this is going to be your starting point to figure out where the water flows. Now let's find the nearest stream or creek to that circle marker. So for our system, the water flows southward or down on your piece of paper. So with your marker, I want you to take that and follow that river all the way down. Eventually the water from the Grand River goes to a Great Lake. What Great Lake do you think that would be? If you need a hint, it starts with the letter E. It's our smallest Great Lake. If you said Lake Erie, you're right. But Lake Erie isn't the end. Do you know what happens to our water after it goes from Lake Erie? It goes over a big set of falls, and then it goes through Lake Ontario before ending up in the Atlantic Ocean. You're right, you got it. So what we do here in our watershed can really impact what the water's like in the lake, in Lake Ontario by Toronto, and all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So this is a big example of our map of the watershed. And we've got tubes on here to show how some of the water will flow. So if you're starting up in Arthur and you started to throw a stick into the river up here, it would flow down the Conestoga River, going all the way through Waterloo and Kitchener where it meets up with the Grand River, down here through Brantford, all the way to Lake Erie. Similarly, maybe you go to school in Fergus or Elora, and you might be on the Grand River or you might be part of Irvine Creek. So if you threw a stick up here in the river, it would flow down the Irvine Creek, hit the Grand River, and then take the Grand River Express all the way down to Lake Erie. Because the system is all connected, you can really see that whatever you do impacts the system. So if you're over here in Guelph and you're enjoying a nice picnic in the park by the river, make sure you don't throw your garbage in the river here, because it will end up floating down all the way to Lake Erie and then out into the Atlantic Ocean. So make sure you keep your litter in its place and make sure you keep the river clean.
Thanks so much, Sue. That was wonderful. Many thanks to you. Well, the next time you come across a creek or a river, why don't you pull out a map and see where it starts, where it flows, and where it actually ends. It's actually a really neat activity. Well, we're going to know about the various Great Lakes today. And we've already figured out that the Grand River drains into Lake Erie, which is, of course, one of the Great Lakes. But how about the other Great Lakes? Well, to find out more about them, let's head to the University of Waterloo.
Hello, my Water Festival friends. My name is Karina McDonald, and I work at the University of Waterloo's Earth Sciences Museum. We were just talking about watersheds and the Grand River watershed. Did you know that the Grand River watershed is just one of many watersheds that surround the Great Lakes? Yep, there's a lot of watersheds out there. And each one of those watersheds drains into one of the Great Lakes. Most of us have been to a lake before, chilling out on the lake shore, going swimming, canoeing, camping, fishing, you name it. Lakes are great recreational areas to relax around. But have you ever actually been to one of the Great Lakes? I'm talking Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, or Ontario.
Wait, what are those names of the lakes again?
I'm talking Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, or Ontario.
Oh, I think I got it.
These lakes are great for a reason. Number one, they're so big that you can't see the other side of a Great Lake.
Nope, can't see it.
Number two, they're so big that they hold 1/5 of the world's fresh surface water. To put that in perspective, if all of these 5 cups were the world's fresh surface water, the Great Lakes would hold 1 entire cup.
Is that yours?
Number 3, they're so big that almost 40 million people depend on them for drinking water and live around them in Canada and the USA.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Number 4, there are over 3,500 species that call the Great Lakes home.
I think I got one.
And number 5, they're so big that they create their own weather patterns. Have you ever heard of the lake effect? That's when clouds pick up so much moisture from a lake that by the time the clouds get to the other side, they're so full of water that it rains or snows on the other side of the lake.
Well, that's a little more precipitation than I was expecting.
No wonder they're called great. Since we can't visit each of the Great Lakes with you today, we're going to go to a place where we can see all of the Great Lakes at the same time. Come on, let's go.
Welcome to the Earth Sciences Museum at the University of Waterloo. Here at the museum, we are wild about all things nature, including water. And since the Great Lakes are such an enormous feature in Canada, we wanted to feature them in our atrium. This is our Great Lakes water fountain. The fountain shows the direction water flows through the Great Lakes in real life. As you can see, water flows from Lake Superior to Lake Huron in Michigan, down through Lake St. Clair, which is not a Great Lake, into Lake Erie, over the fabulous Niagara Falls, and into Lake Ontario. Once water flows through all the lakes, it eventually makes its way out the St. Lawrence River and into the Atlantic Ocean. The fountain also shows how wide and deep the lakes are when comparing one to another. As you can see here, Lake Superior is the largest and also the deepest of the 5 lakes. It is huge compared to Lake Ontario and very deep compared to shallow Lake Erie. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I hope you think the lakes are as great as I do.
Thanks, Karina. Bang on. Great job. Now, we're learning about the Great Lakes. Well, let's take a deeper dive, if you will. And we're going to turn it over to Sue Reed. Take it away, Sue.
Welcome to the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival, our virtual festival. The focus today is on watersheds, and I think that we all have a better understanding now of how they work and where we are within the watershed. I'm still curious, though, about the Great Lakes, and today we're going to be talking with John from the University of Waterloo. So welcome, John, and thank you for joining us to share your knowledge about the Great Lakes. To start, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you do at the University of Waterloo? Let our friends out there know what your role is and anything else you'd like to share about the University of Waterloo.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. I work at the University of Waterloo. My name's John Johnston, and I'm a geologist or earth scientist. So I teach about geology, and especially geology in the Great Lakes, back millions of years to thousands of years to today. I also work with teams of scientists across North America trying to figure out why the lakes are going up and down, sometimes in these patterns through geologic time of years to decades to centuries to millennia. And so we study and look for clues in the beaches, in the sand, and the levels or layers of the sand to understand why it goes up and down through time.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. So maybe we can start by first telling us which lakes make up the Great Lakes.
There are 5 lakes in the Great Lakes, as shown on this image right here. I've got a few props that this neat shape of Lake Superior, the largest lake, is like this really large container right here. So if we stick this on here, we would put it way up north at the head of the system. And then we would have 2 other lakes, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. They go north-south, or Huron's kind of like a hand type shape. And they go below Lake Superior, right here and here. And then we have 2 other lakes. We have Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, which kind of go east-west and are elongated in that way. And they go here and here. So the Great Lakes consist of 5 big lakes: Superior, Huron, Michigan, Erie, and Ontario.
Oh, great. Yeah, so now we know which of the lakes that make up the 5 Great Lakes. When we look at the Great Lakes, which way does the water flow?
Ah, great question. We have given you a handout to actually look at and follow along with us on the direction of flow of the Great Lakes. So if you pull out your handout, we have some lakes listed in the bottom, and we have some blank areas in the top. And if you follow along in Lake Superior way up north, in this blank right here, if you write Lake Superior, water begins here and flows down to Lake Huron right here. And so you can add a label right here, Lake Huron. But Lake Huron and Michigan are the same level. There's a wide enough space between these lakes that water can go back and forth, and it's one lake level. And so this long and skinny lake is Lake Michigan. And then it can flow down through a river to Lake Erie here. And so if you fill this out as Lake Erie, and then over Niagara Falls, through the Niagara River down to Lake Ontario right here, and then down the St. Lawrence River all the way to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then to the Atlantic Ocean. So it goes all the way from Lake Superior up high down to the Atlantic Ocean through many stair steps.
Well, that's a long journey for a water drop. So we saw sort of the journey of the water, but how does water make it from Lake Superior to the Atlantic Ocean?
Oh, great question. We created another handout for you to follow along in this profile or elevation or stair steps from really high elevation to low elevation. So we're talking Lake Superior is 183 meters above the Atlantic Ocean, which is a relative zero down here. And so if you're up high in Lake Superior, you go through a lock that helps hold up the water or release it, and go through the St. Mary's River to Lake Huron. And Lake Huron and Michigan are drawn as one here. Lake Michigan a little bit deeper and Huron a little shallower, but they're a similar level at 176 meters. So the water level from Superior to Huron and Michigan is 7 meters. In the St. Mary's River, it cascades down to 176 meters. And then the water flows into Lake Erie. And the difference in elevation between Lake Huron and Lake Erie is only 3 meters down the St. Clair and Detroit River. And then from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, it's a big fall. Across the Niagara Falls, through the Niagara River, it goes down about 100 meters, down to 76 meters above sea level. And then it takes other steps through a number of locks down to the Atlantic Ocean. So we go from 183 meters all the way down in stair steps, some of which we help to regulate and hold up the water or release the water.
Wow, that's a big journey and a big drop from the top of Lake Superior to the Atlantic Ocean. So when we look at the Great Lakes, which one do we in our watershed, in the Grand River watershed, which one do we have the most impact on?
Right. Many people think about this lake right here, this small shallow lake called Lake Erie, which has been in the news quite a bit because of the algae blooms. or the green looking tinge of the lake, which sometimes impacts life and fish and is not good. And that is washed in from a lot of the agricultural practices surrounding the lake and in the watershed. So that's pretty important and impacted quite a bit. But let me turn your attention to Lake Ontario. We have a lot of big cities in Canada and the US beside this lake. And we also have at the end of the system, a whole bunch of locks holding Lake Ontario up so that water is sometimes released and sometimes held in the lake. And so we've created a level lake, which isn't always good for the wetlands to be healthy. They need that natural oscillation. So we regulate those locks to allow those natural oscillations to keep all the wetlands around Lake Ontario healthy.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. So which of the lakes, Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, which one's bigger? Because it's hard to tell when you look at them.
Ooh, the great way to look at this is in your image right here. If you were to look at Lake Erie, it's really shallow. Lake Ontario, really deep. But let's look at our containers and have a little fun. So we have Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. If I were to turn them to the side and keep them level, see how Lake Ontario is deeper. It's about 3 to 4 times deeper than Lake Erie. So the volume of Ontario is bigger and it's deeper than Lake Erie, the shallowest lake in the Great Lakes.
So I'm curious, how long would it take a water drop to get from Lake Superior to Lake Ontario through the journey that you just described?
That's a great question. And the journey may vary. It may take different pathways. But generally, the shortest way through from Superior to the Atlantic Ocean is decades. So 20, 40 years. But it could take as long as centuries, hundreds of years. Let me explain. Lake Superior can hold a water droplet for up to 200 years. And then when it releases it to Lake Huron could keep it for about 20 years, 25 years. But if it goes over to Lake Michigan, it could hold a water droplet for about 100 years. But if it makes its way down to Lake Erie, the really shallow lake of the Great Lakes, it only stays in there years, about 3 to 5 years. Whereas Lake Ontario, the little deeper lake and a little bit bigger than Erie, holds it for about 6 to 8 years. And so they hold water and transfer water a little bit differently, but it could take anywhere from 20 to 40 years to hundreds of years to make it to the ocean.
So each water drop is individual and has an individual journey. Thank you. So the last question I'm curious about, which one is your favorite lake and why is it your favorite lake?
Let me pull off my favorite lake right here. Lake Superior. It is the mightiest, deepest. You could take the CN Tower and put it in Lake Superior, and it's about 400 meters. So just the top of the CN Tower would stick out the top. It's so deep. It's also a really neat shape. That if you look at the shape, it's like a wolf's head and the mouth right here. And it's the most rugged and northern lake. So there's not many people up there, and it's beautiful to go up and visit. And also, it's really nice to research because it's the most unknown lake of all.
Still has some questions without answers for it.
Yes, a lot.
Yes. Well, thank you today for joining us and telling us a little bit more about Great Lakes. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we say goodbye to our friends?
No, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. The Great Lakes are so great. Everybody knows about them around the world, even astronauts seeing them from space and recognizing where they are on Earth, seeing the Great Lakes, a great freshwater resource.
Thank you. Well, we encourage our friends to get out there, especially as the weather's getting nicer, and explore our closest Great Lake in Lake Erie. But if you have the chance to travel further to Lake Ontario, Lake Huron, Lake Superior, which is your favorite, I encourage you to do that. So thank you so much, John, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us today.
You are welcome.
Well, thanks, Sue and John, for the great information about the Great Lakes. Great? Get it? We're here all week, folks. Well, now it's time to turn our attention to a worldwide problem, and that's the plastic pollution problem in our oceans. And Jane is actually going to tell us what we can do to help prevent this. Over to you, Jane.
Hi everyone, I'm a student in the Waterloo area learning about the importance of surface water and groundwater in the Waterloo-Wellington area. One of the problems we're facing with protecting our water is plastic pollution in our lakes and oceans. Did you know that between 5 and 13 million tons of plastic enter the ocean every year? That's about the same weight as 100 CN towers. Plastic is in a lot of the things that we use every day, but a lot of the plastics that end up in our water are single-use plastic, such as plastic bags, plastic containers, plastic straws, plastic cutlery, and plastic water bottles. These types of plastic never really go away. They take hundreds of years to break down into tiny pieces like this that stay in the water and in the environment. Plastic in lakes and oceans is also harmful to animals. Some animals will eat it and their stomachs end up full of plastic. Other animals get plastic wrapped around their necks or stuck up their noses. Ouch! Even though we live far away from the ocean in Ontario, the water we see around us is still connected to the ocean. We live in the Grand River watershed. This means that the water around us, including in this storm pond, will drain into the Grand River and then into Lake Erie and eventually into the Atlantic Ocean. If this plastic bag accidentally ended up in the storm pond here, it would follow the flow of the water all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, where it would join millions of other plastic bags polluting our oceans. So what can we do to help? We could use reusable utensils and bags and cutlery instead of single-use plastics. So for example, in my reusable lunch bag, I have a reusable water bottle, a reusable container, and reusable utensils. We can also buy local produce with less plastic packaging. We can also make sure we don't litter and pick up litter around our neighborhoods so that it doesn't end up in the water. And if we have something made of plastic that we no longer need, try to donate it, reuse it, or recycle it before throwing it away. Thanks everyone for watching this video, and I hope you learned something about how to fight plastic pollution.
Well, thanks very much, Jane. That was really fascinating. Really kind of not a great idea to think that if you threw a plastic water bottle in the Grand River, that there is a possibility that it could end up in the Atlantic Ocean out by Nova Scotia. It gives you pause to think. Also gives you really great motivation to use reusable water bottles, isn't it? Well, we'd like to know what kind of promise you're going to make to help reduce the use of one-time use plastics. Why don't you share your ideas with us in the chat room? And who knows, maybe your idea will catch on. Now, we're going to turn to one of our regular segments in the Groundwater Festival, and that's our Career Corner. And this is the time where we learn about people whose job it is to look after our clean drinking water.
Hello everyone, my name is Gerd Purcell and I work with the Grand River Conservation Authority. My job title here is a Water Structures Maintenance Technologist. A typical day for me here would involve me looking after the water structures, which are the dams, the gauge stations, water quality stations, and the weather stations. The funnest thing to work at is probably the dams because they're big. A dam along the river works as a structure and an earth embankments which hold back portions of a river or a creek and form lakes. And these are used to help control flooding in our watershed. as well as adding water to the downstream portions of the river and the creeks in the summer when things get dry. What I like most about my job is the variety that it gives me in doing different things to repair parts of the infrastructure. I like the fact that I get to work outside. My favorite subjects in school were biology and gym. Biology basically is the environment, and gym, because what I do is a lot of physical work, and gym helped me stay in shape so I could, be able to do this kind of work. Some really cool equipment that I get to use for my job are boats, and we get to work with cranes when we do some big work at the big dams, removing gates and heavy equipment. And then some of the smaller tools we get to use, hand drills and lots of portable equipment, which is always fun.
Hi, my name is Zoe Green. I am the Enterprise Geodata Specialist, or GIS Specialist, at the Grand River Conservation Authority. GIS, it stands for Geographic Information Systems. So basically it means that I work with a lot of maps, I work with a lot of information, and it's all about where things are located. Things like creeks and rivers, forests, wildlife habitat, roads, all of those things can be shown on maps. A typical day for me would be helping other people find maps and information that they want to work with. It can be helping them figure out, how close do they live to the river, or where's the closest forest to my house. These are kinds of things they can figure out with maps and the information that you can read from a map. Also, my job involves some computer programming or coding, so I'm doing a bit of that. And I also teach people how to use GPS, how to read maps, how to use special apps if they want to create their own maps. When I was in school, some of my favorite subjects, there was a lot of good ones, but I know after high school I went to university and I studied environmental science because I was interested in learning more about the natural systems and how the natural world worked. I studied things about soil, and I studied things about meteorology and the weather, also about wildlife and botany and plants, so it was quite diverse. And then part of that was learning how to use computers and access information to support understanding the environment, and that's what introduced me to maps and information about GPS and understanding how that information can be used to help protect the environment. So with my job, there can be some pretty cool tools to use because it's based in technology, and technology changes so much. So some of the cool things that I get to use are special apps that you can install on your phone, and those apps can help you figure out where you are when you go hiking, or those apps can be used to make your own special maps. Other cool tools, there are special satellites that are orbiting Earth, and they take photographs of the Grand River watershed. And I get to look at those photographs, and I can see different things that are in the watershed and on the landscape. So it's pretty neat when you think that you're able to work with information that's been captured from outer space. In terms of what inspired me to get into this career field, I would say that it has to do with my love of the environment and wanting to protect natural features and also to understand the world around me. That would be one of the key things that inspired me. I think the more that we can understand, then we can work to help protect it. Don't be afraid to explore. You can try new things, get permission from your parents if you want to go on the internet. You can check out some great mapping websites. Google Earth is a fun one to take a look at. And don't be afraid to go exploring and get outside, enjoy the natural world, learn about the watershed, and take a map with you. There's a lot you can learn.
Gerd, Zoe, many thanks to you. It's the kind of work that the Grand River Conservation Authority does. It is really important in managing our water systems in this region. And perhaps when you get a little older, maybe you could work for them as well. Something to think about. Well, we have a great way to finish off our morning, and that is with a story and a song. The story is Blackflies to Blueberries. So, away we go.
Blackflies to Blueberries, Wally and Deanna's Wetland Adventure. Story by Leanne Gelsthorpe and Peter Russell. Illustrations by Roger Fernandez.
Read by Peter Russell and Karina MacDonald.
It's evening in the forest, and the bats are on patrol. Campers down by the marsh tonight, hoots the owl as the bats swoop low. Wally Worm and Wesley Dragon are having a bedtime snack. Wesley breathes hard on the fire and burns his marshmallow to a cinder. A raccoon family arrives in time to see the action. They spy an open package of marshmallows and watch for a chance for a free meal. In the darkness, moths flutter and fireflies flit.
Deanna Waterdroplet appears the next morning in the mist. "Wake up, you two. It's time for an adventure," says Deanna.
Wally and Wesley open their eyes and watch the dewdrops fall from the tent and patter onto the grass.
"It's going to be a busy day because so many water droplets have arrived in today's mist," says Deanna. "We play and travel through the ground, helping the plants and animals live and grow." The wetland warms with the heat of the morning sun. Birds sing and spiders wait for the sparkling droplets to leave their webs before checking for insects caught during the night. "Water droplets come to wetlands to relax and have fun," says Deanna. "A wetland is one of the most exciting places water droplets can explore. Plants, animals, insects, fish, and birds all need our help."
Wally and Wesley pack their tent and tidy up the campsite.
Deanna points out some of the creatures who make the wetland their home. "Do you see that beaver eating breakfast? The woodpecker is feeding his family in that hollow tree."
A hawk thinks Wally would make a good breakfast and dives towards him. Wesley frightens him away with a burst of flame.
"We are now in a true wetland area where the ground is spongy and squishy with water," explains Deanna.
"I don't want to get my feet wet," grumbles Wesley.
"Wally can give you a pair of rubber boots from his magic backpack," says Deanna.
"Wally, do you have my size?" asks Wesley. Wesley slops through the water-soaked sphagnum moss, droplets squirting in all directions as he walks. Wesley asks Wally if he has binoculars. "There is so much to see. Oh, look," exclaimed Wesley, focusing the binoculars. "I can see a snake slithering towards a frog." Now the frog sees the snake coming and hops away.
Deanna points out Taffy Turtle and her friends basking on logs in the heat of the sun.
"I can see a dragonfly chasing some other insects," said Wesley.
The sun is high in the sky, and Deanna realizes it is almost noon in the wetland. "Let's do what everyone else is doing. It's lunchtime." Taffy is startled by the warm, moist air steaming up her sunglasses. She sees a fuzzy green blob rising in front of her. Water droplets splash down, cleaning her glasses. "Oh, it's you, Wade Moose. Did you come for lunch?" asks Taffy. Wade waits to finish his mouthful of plants before speaking, just as his mother has taught him to do.
Wally takes the tablecloth from his backpack and spreads it out. He also unpacks bowls and plates. These rice cakes will taste great with blueberries and cranberries which grow all around here. Wesley, you go and pick blueberries and I will pick cranberries. Unexpected lunch guests include ants looking for a meal and bog lemming tasting with a watercress salad. Blackflies buzz around Wesley's head.
"Hey, dragon," yells the blackfly, buzzing between Wesley's eyes. "So, you like blueberries, do ya?"
Yummy, said Wesley, licking his purple lips.
"We blackflies work hard in the springtime to give you those tasty berries. Each of us works all day, dusting ourselves with blueberry flower pollen while drinking the blueberry nectar. We flit from flower to flower, pick up, drop off, all day long just so you can enjoy these berries in the summer." Deanna asks Winston Frog to show Wally the tiny living things in the water. Wally uses a lens to see hydra, green algae, mosquito larvae, and Winston's 62 tadpole babies.
I had no idea that there were so many tiny things living in such a small amount of water, said Wally.
"Be careful," cries Deanna. "There are special plants all around you. These plants have difficulty finding food to make them grow. Pitcher plants and sundew plants must trap their food. The pitcher plant has a hairy slide inside, which takes the surprised flies to the bottom of the pitcher, where they are digested. The sundew catches insects on leaves covered with sticky droplets of digestive juices. By now it's late afternoon and Deanna sinks slowly into the moss. "It's time for me to rest. I'll see you all again," says Deanna.
"Thanks for the adventure," replied Wally. "I really enjoyed the blueberries," added Wesley. Wally takes out a hot air balloon from his backpack and Wesley fills it with 50 puffs. As Wally and Wesley gently rise over the wetland and the forest, they notice another family has set up a tent at the campsite they used the night before. "I hope they enjoy the wetland as much as we did, Wesley," said Wally. "I know they will have blueberries for breakfast," puffed Wesley as he puts more hot breath into the balloon.
"Let's put all the parts together now," says Deanna. "We've seen big living things and little ones too, in the water and out of the water. All are connected to a wetland and its history. Once upon a time, more than 10,000 years ago, when the climate was much colder, there was a lake in a spruce forest which gradually collected mud and plant remains. The lake level changed as the climate changed to become a marsh filled with sedges, water lilies, and aquatic mosses, and teemed with living creatures. Another change occurred many thousands of years later, and the place became a swamp surrounded by a mixture of trees. Scientists study the history of a wetland by examining pollen and other remains found in the layers of peat underground. The scientists can determine which stages of the wetland development have happened in an area. Wetlands preserve a fossil record of themselves. The end.
The man said you better stay in bed, it's another gray rainy day. Everyone to spare, there's water in the air, it's gonna wash your smiles away. All the plans you made will have to be delayed because of this H2O. Everyone hide, you have to stay inside, there's nowhere you can go. 'Cause it's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. Well, the stuff we need to live is falling from the sky. No time to celebrate, hang your heads and cry. Farmers might say that showers are a blessing, but we've been told that rain should be depressing. So shut down all the playgrounds, close the summer camps. Imagine what would happen if the children got damp. Hide out in your houses, hide out in your cars. If you want to find some water, go look for it on Mars. 'Cause parents all know, and you should not forget, the worst thing that can happen is if something gets wet. It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. Well, the weatherman said you better stay in bed. It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring.
Catchy tune, Sean. Many thanks to you. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today at the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. And just a reminder to you fine folks that today's event was actually recorded, and we will be sending links out to you via email to all the registered attendees. And I'd also like to take this time to invite you to join us tomorrow at 10 o'clock for more of the Children's Groundwater Festival. And tomorrow's theme is groundwater. Just what you want at a groundwater festival. Well, I hope you can join us tomorrow because it's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, bye for now.